Get going, Mark? You feel ready?
I think so. I'm a little, this is a big deal. We got a lot of people joining us today.
I know it's still growing. I don't know what folks can see, but there's actually over 4,000 people registered for our 2-day conference. Right now, we're closing in on 800 online right now, and I expect it will grow. So why don't we get started? I think a lot of you are part of the Marc Brackett fan club, which includes me as well. Mark is the founder and director of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. And though they don't often say it, Yale is really one of the birthplaces of emotional intelligence research. So it's really ground zero in the global study of emotional intelligence. Mark is a professor there and is also co-founder of Ruler, the social emotional learning program that's used by schools around the world. And Mark works really all over the world with school systems on emotional intelligence. And finally, he's the author of Permission to Feel, which is really, I think, a groundbreaking book on emotional intelligence. I got to read it before it was done and since it was done. And I think it's really the defining book on making emotional intelligence relevant and practical for people and meaningful. So most of you who've registered have registered using or through the BookPal site where you actually got a copy of the book. So you'll receive that in 3 to 4 weeks, roughly. So we're excited to have Mark here today. And we'll look forward to hearing how everybody's going throughout the program. And so with that, Mark,
Thank you,
leave
Matt.
you and let you do it. Go get
I
them.
appreciate it. See you later. All right. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. So excited to be here today. Got to see many of you last night for the opening pre-conference where I talked about the history of emotional intelligence. I have to say, after doing that presentation, which I don't do too frequently, I really had a lot of time to reminisce last night around, my own history and my own education and the gratitude that I have for the people who really paved the path for me to have a career. And so that's for Peter and Jack, my mentors. I just can't thank you enough. So with that said, we're going to jump right in here and we're going to have some fun today. And we're also going to go a little deeper than maybe we've gone before. I just want to make sure that Ryan, you're going to grab the mic or we're going to wait till later to do that? That's right. Okay. So I decided to change the title of my presentation because why not? And I'm calling it Emotional Intelligence from Theory to Practice to an Emotion Revolution. And as many of you know, my personal vision, mission, dream is to create an emotion revolution, both in our nation's homes, in our nation's schools, and our nation's workplaces. And I guess it's going to start right now. If you want to follow or say anything kind on Twitter or Instagram, please use all of our hashtags, and those are the handles. And here we go. As you know, we like to start off with the simple but profound question. How are you feeling? So everyone just take a moment and just check in. How are you feeling today? Are you in the yellow feeling bright-eyed and cheery-faced? Are you in the green feeling calm, content, tranquil, peaceful, relaxed? Are you in the blue and the red feeling down or lonely or sad? Are you in the red feeling a little tense and anxious and worried? Or maybe you're feeling multiple emotions. If you're like me, you may feel 5 or 6 feelings at the same time. 10 or more is problematic, but 9 or lower we can deal with. So just check in. How are you feeling? Can we set an intention for the day? Right? We're here together to learn, which is my favorite thing to do, is learn with people. And so maybe we can just take a nice long inhale and an exhale and just bring ourselves into the room, into the presentation. And again, let's set that intention for getting the most out of today and tomorrow. I decided I want to make the case for emotional intelligence, stronger than I've ever made before. And I think there are multiple reasons why we need emotional intelligence now more than ever before. The first is the mental health case. If we look at the data across the United States pre-COVID, and I'm being very US centric here right now, 18% of the population is affected by an anxiety disorder. 60% of college students are reporting overwhelming anxiety. And if we look right here, right now with COVID, compared to the 2018, U.S. adults in April of 2020 were 8 times more likely to report serious mental distress. Think about that. 8-fold increase in reports of serious mental distress due to COVID. When you look at college students and our suicide rates, sadly, and I know these are uncomfortable data to look at, but it's important for us to acknowledge the fact that we have suicide increases in our nation, around 45% in the last 20 years. It's the second leading cause of college students' death. And we see depression here at 40%. It's a leading cause of disability across the world. When we look at bullying and bias, because I think of bullying as a mental health challenge. I was a kid who was horrifically bullied in school. I hated school. I was a C and D student as a student, back in the day of elementary and middle school due to my early trauma, as well as just not being able to be present in school because of the meanness and cruelty that was happening. You would think after 30 years of social and emotional learning and 35 years of talking about emotional intelligence that we would have a shift in bullying in our nation's schools. And we don't. About a third of all middle school and high school students are bullied each day. And actually, more recent data show that it has increased over the last couple of years. We know that we have racial bias in our schools. We know that our Black male students are much more likely to get suspended than their white counterparts. We also know that we have rampant anti-Semitism in the United States right now. There's been about 100% increase each year in the number of reports to the Anti-Defamation League. So when we think about the need for an emotion revolution, you can see that mental health is really a priority. Look at the research on COVID-19, more recent research. A longitudinal study of families with young children reported a 67% increase. I'll repeat that, a 67% increase in the number of parents who reported feeling anxious or depressed all day, a 42% increase in children's externalizing behaviors. And we know for our Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, right, there's a higher chance of contracting the virus. They have greater need in many cases for food and shelter, less access to quality health care. And we know from research that Black Americans have the greatest mortality rates, 2.3 times more likely than their white counterparts. Let's take the burnout engagement case for emotional intelligence. 20 to 40% of our nation's students are chronically disengaged at school. 50 to 60% of employees are disengaged at work. 85% of teachers say work-life imbalance is affecting their ability to teach. That was pre-COVID. Imagine what it's going to be like going back to school in the fall. 13% of employees say they are just quote-unquote miserable. Okay, so now there's like the strength-based reason for this, the key outcomes. If you look at the results of a study from the class of 2030 by Microsoft and McKinsey, what you find is that employers, right, are saying that 30 to 40% of today's jobs are requiring these quote-unquote soft skills. But 58% of employers do not believe new graduates are adequately prepared for the workforce, especially with social and emotional learning skills. So take a moment to think about that. The need is ever greater, and what we're finding is what? People are not having the skills. As someone who has spent his entire professional career as a professor, I realize it. Even at a place like Yale University, where I have the privilege of working, the things that get you into Yale are not the things that get you out of Yale, right? Grades and test scores are what, universities look for to admit students. But truthfully, when I go to hire somebody, do I look at their grade point average or their SAT scores? I mean, truth is, everyone who I've hired or I've ever taught had higher SAT scores than I had. And I've done okay. And so the question is, are we emphasizing the right set of skills in our nation's education system? No one's going to argue that literacy and math aren't important, but maybe we need to have more balance in terms of what we're teaching. When you look at the research, what we find is that these are decades of research now, about 20 years of research. When we look at emotional intelligence scores, we find that those who have lower scores in emotional intelligence tend to look like the column on the left. Yet those who have higher scores on our objective assessment tools of emotional intelligence look like the column on the right. So think about that. Pretty valuable set of skills. When we look at youth, we've done numerous studies on the emotional intelligence of adolescents and young people. We find, again, those who are lower in emotional intelligence look like the column on the left. Those who are higher in emotional intelligence look like the column on the right. Again, showing that these skills are critically important to almost all of life outcomes. Recently, my colleague Zorana Ivcevic, who you'll get to hear in a little while, did a study in our center where we looked at supervisors. Look at this. Just take a moment and digest that. These are the wordles are the feelings of the employees in groups when their supervisor has either high or low emotional intelligence. So do you think that there's a business case for emotional intelligence? I think positive emotions are going to lead to pretty much better outcomes for our nation's workforce. Now, this is a busy slide, and it's okay because we're going to take it slowly. These are individual emotion states that we did in this study. And take a look at this. Look at the left, inspiration. When you are working in an organization with a supervisor who is lower in emotional intelligence, you reported having inspiration around 27% of the time. But when you were working in an organization with a supervisor with higher emotional intelligence, 78% of the time. Just take a moment and digest that. I mean, to me, this is absolutely ridiculous. 50% difference in reported feelings of inspiration just based on the supervisor's emotional intelligence. And you can see that passion and happiness and pride and respect and even safety. When you look at the unpleasant emotions, what you see is greater negative emotions, more anger, more disgust, more stress, more frustration. Frustration was the highest, right? About 75% of the time, people feel frustrated when they work for someone who's low in emotional intelligence versus just 25% of the time or 30% when you work for someone who's higher in emotional intelligence. Has anyone here ever worked for someone who doesn't have a lot of emotional intelligence? And how many of you, when you wake up in the morning, you say to yourself something like, gosh, I can't wait to be in a meeting with that person. Gosh, I can't wait to work with that person. No, we don't do that. Take a look at these data. That your skill acquisition, your turnover intentions, your job satisfaction, your burnout, your daily engagement, your fear of speaking up when there's a problem, and literally ethical behavior all vary as a function of that supervisor's emotional intelligence. And Zorana will probably go into these data more deeply in her panel. These data are the organizational support for emotional intelligence. So this is when you reported, like, my organization really takes seriously emotional intelligence. Guess what? Same kind of outcomes. Organizations that take seriously the emotion skills of supervisors and others are places where people experience more pleasant emotions and less unpleasant emotions. So that leads me to the vision of the Center for Emotional Intelligence. Our vision is to use the power of emotions to create a healthier and more equitable, innovative, and compassionate society. How many of you are on that bus? Yes? Let me repeat that. Our vision is to use the power of emotions to create a healthier and more equitable, innovative, and compassionate society. How many of you are up for that? All right, good. Let's just take a pause for a moment. I don't know about you, but I have been living on the most interesting emotional roller coaster I think I've ever lived on. I think over the last couple of months, being in quarantine has just, maybe it's changed my whole personality. How about for you? How have you been feeling lately? How have you been feeling in the morning when you're waking up, at breakfast? How are you feeling in the late morning, in the afternoon? How are you feeling in the evening at the end of the day? Well, if you're like the people that we've studied now well over 15,000 people. And this is what they tell us. We're just living in a pool of anxiety, uncertainty, worry, frustration, overwhelmed. So I think now more than ever before, based on COVID, based on racial injustice, we have a population, we have really a world that is experiencing a lot more negative emotions than ever before. And we have kids who are also feeling just a whole range of emotions, from frustration to boredom to anxiety. And so when we think about how we feel, going back to the mood meter, it does seem like we're a bit emotionally out of balance, doesn't it? Think about it. Life is not supposed to be all red and blue. It's certainly not supposed to be all yellow and green. I mean, my goodness, it's definitely not happening for me. Like, there's no way I'm just going to have a day or a week or a month that I'm just excited, happy, joyful, filled, calm, and satisfied. I mean, I'd like a little bit more maybe than I have right now. But we certainly can't expect that we're going to be happy all the time. As a matter of fact, what research shows is that oftentimes the more we strive to be happy, the worse we feel later on. So the question I have for all of us is, what's the goal here? Is the goal to just get rid of our anxiety and frustration and overwhelmed and tiredness and exhaustion? Or maybe it's to have greater emotional balance. So this leads me to my life's work, which is the book that I wrote called Permission to Feel. And truthfully, when I was working on this particular book, it took me till I was 49 to start writing it. I was challenged in terms of what to call it. People wanted me to call it emotional intelligence. And I was like, that book's been written 300 times. I really think it should be Permission to Feel, because in my 20 years of running around the world as a self-proclaimed emotion scientist, I've learned that people don't even want to answer the question, how are you feeling? And a lot of people who ask it don't even really want to know what people are going to say. They don't want to listen to the answer. And so I really wondered, do we give ourselves the permission to feel? Do we give the people we love the permission to feel? So let's just take a moment and think about, what does that concept mean to you? When we say permission to feel, what does that make you think about? And I'd like you to put that in the chat room. And I'm going to take a look. Allowing to be myself. No judgment, a safe space. Just be who I am. Thank you for sharing all of that. As you know, if you've read my book or will read my book, I dedicated my book to my Uncle Marvin, who was my hero, who I assert gave me the permission to feel. I had a pretty tough childhood. Truth is, I was abused as a child by a neighbor that was very threatening and very scary. I had two parents who loved me, but truth is, they were dealing with their own emotional challenges, nevertheless trying to deal with mine. And so my mom was very anxious and would say things like, "Oh my goodness, I'm having a breakdown." And my father would just say, "Toughen up, toughen up." And so I suppressed my feelings for most of my childhood, repressed them, ate them, screamed at them. Maybe you can relate. So I'm going to ask you now to go to the next set of questions. On a scale from 1 to 10, 1, I really do have permission to feel at home. To 10, 1, I don't really feel like I have the permission to be my true feeling self. To 10, I really do feel like I can be my true feeling self at home. And the same for at work. So what are your responses? How do you rate yourself in terms of your comfort level? Your ability to be your true, full feeling self in these different contexts? At home, at work. What are your ratings? What do you believe? Can you experience and express all emotions authentically, honestly? Do you feel like there's people who will listen? Just something to think about. And let me tell you that my goal for all of you is that you score yourself a 9 or a 10, over the next coming months and years, and that this conference can support you in that, but also spreading the word about this work can make all that difference as well. So we know that emotions matter. Think about this. We give ourselves the permission to feel, and then we have to convince people that emotions really matter. And as some of you know from hearing me speak before, I've been on this journey to get people to believe that emotions matter. And there's so much resistance, I can't tell you. From being in schools in London, and I had a teacher at 9 o'clock in the morning after I began my presentation say something like this: "My job is not to talk to my students about my feelings." I remember thinking to myself, oh shit, it's like 9 o'clock in the morning. I've got a full day of training. This is not going to go so well. To other professionals, actually school-based personnel, saying things like, "I think this program is going to turn boys into homosexuals." I'm like, really? Like, I don't even know where to begin with that. To professors here at my own university where I work, having, listen to me speak and say things like, "What happened to Yale? We produce Nobel laureates, not nice people." So there is a lot of resistance out there. I think the 4,000 people who register for this conference are like aspiring to be those emotion scientists. But I have to tell you, we've got a lot of work ahead of us. And I think you can go with the heart by giving people the permission to feel, giving yourself that permission. You can go with the science. So I like to play in both playgrounds. And the science is what we're going to go to now. Attention, memory, and learning. How you feel, literally. Think about this. You learn what you care about. You pay attention to the things that make you feel curious. Do you know that when we feel the emotion of inspiration, the air of our brain, the brainstem, lights up? When we feel bored, it doesn't light up. So my friend Mary Helen Immordino Young, a neuroscientist, says, literally, when we're in experiences where we're feeling awe and inspiration, it's like our life force is lit up. It's pretty amazing when you think about it. When we feel tremendous stress and overwhelm, like I did as a kid, and we're fearing for our lives, as many people are feeling these days, we're not in learning mode. We're not in relationship building mode. We're in survival mode. So when you think about how the brain operates in terms of how the emotion system is inextricably linked to our health and wellness and our cognitive system, you realize that it is a moral right, obligation, right, to make sure that people understand this link between emotions and attention. Decision making. Anyone here make a bad decision over the last couple of months? Oh my gosh, it's been rough. And most of us like to think we're objective, rational creatures. Yes, that's my thought process that decided on that. The research shows the opposite. In many ways, our emotion systems subconsciously influence the choices we make. And for those who know our school-based research, you know that we've done studies where we've randomly assigned people to be in different emotion states. And then they grade papers. And what we found was the teachers in the one mood condition, the unpleasant mood, 1 to 2 full grades lower than in the other mood. When we asked them, do you believe that how you felt had any influence? What are you talking about? I grade papers all the time. So what that tells us is that our emotion system is inextricably linked to our decision-making system, but that link is oftentimes subconscious. Relationship quality. If you've seen me present, this is my favorite quote. People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. Right? Relationships are the drivers of our learning. As a matter of fact, we are born to be in relationship. We don't survive without relationships. When you really get down to it, think about that. We as human creatures cannot survive without bonding, without attachments. But yet our facial expressions and our body language and our vocal tone sometimes say otherwise. Think about that. Maybe you should think about what were the facial expressions that you noticed growing up in your home? Were they warm and welcoming, or were they piercing and scary? In my school, didn't see a lot of warmth, didn't see a lot of caring. Think about this. Nearly 2/3 of American youth in our nation's schools don't believe there's a caring adult for them in their school. How is that possible? Think about that. As I said earlier, I wrote my book and dedicated it to my uncle. I was on a book tour and last year, and I was giving a speech in New York State where my uncle was an educator, and I was sharing, which I didn't do typically, like a real deep story about my uncle and me. And I asked people, who was your Uncle Marvin? Maybe take a moment and think about that for a minute. Did you have someone who gave you the permission to feel? Someone who loved you unconditionally, who listened, who was non-judgmental? I tell you this story because I was giving this speech and I said, who was your Uncle Marvin? Did anyone have an Uncle Marvin? And this one man raised his hand. He goes, my Uncle Marvin was your Uncle Marvin. I'm like, what are you talking about? He goes, your uncle was my middle school teacher 45 years ago. And the details that he remembered about my uncle were mind-blowing. And it just reminds me of this quote, right? My uncle knew how to create the conditions. And that goes at home, it goes at school, and it goes in the workplace. Emotions are the drivers of our physical and mental health. Give you an example. In our one study, we found that the culture and climate of an organization, right, the feeling, that you have at work, was so correlated with the individual's emotions like stress, and also associated with things like stress-related sleep problems, burnout, intentions to leave their job, even body mass index. So we have to understand the science between emotion and our health, because then it becomes a public health matter. Think about it. The more stress we're under, the more cortisol we release, the more our insulin in our body gets messed up, the more we crave sugar and fatty foods for immediate gratification, and then it just cycles and cycles and cycles. Lastly, performance and creativity. And you're going to hear something on creativity during the conference from Zorana, who's an expert in this area. What we say in our center is emotions are the fuel of creativity, but our skills and emotional intelligence are what determine whether or not that creativity becomes an actual product. For 20 years, I've been studying college students and high school people and people around the world. And what I found is that, your IQ gets you in, as I said earlier, but it doesn't get you out. And there's so many smart people who don't achieve their dreams in life. And what I realize is that they don't have the emotion skills to deal with the disappointment, the frustration, the overwhelm, the anxiety. So our cognitive abilities are insufficient to be creative, to achieve our dreams in life. We've got to have the emotion skills. So that leads to chapter 2, which is, are you an emotion scientist or are you an emotion judge? This has to do with your mindset around emotions. I mean, literally ask yourself, really be honest with yourself. Are you open and curious about emotions? Do you ask people how they feel and listen? Do you think of all emotions as information? Do you think, I have feelings about my anxiety. I'm a bad person, or I'm weak because I'm anxious. Do you want to get granular and specific? When you have failed, which I'm sure you have, at dealing with your feelings over the last couple of months, do you say, all right, tomorrow's another day. I'm going to do this. I'm going to learn new strategies. I'm going to practice. Or do you just be like, it's hopeless? The emotion judge is more hopeless or critical or closed. The emotion judge is more the knower. The emotion judge just sees good or bad. Maybe you're an emotion scientist with some people and an emotion judge with others. Maybe that's something that you can spend time thinking about. And that leads us to the skills of emotional intelligence, where I want to spend the rest of my time with you. So as you know, emotional intelligence was coined by Peter Salovey and Jack Mayer back in 1990. They wrote a theory called emotional intelligence. In 1995, Dan Goleman wrote a book that became very popular called Emotional Intelligence, where he took the original scientific theory and broadened it out to be an array of skills and competencies. And then in 1997, Peter Salovey and Jack Mayer rewrote their theory to make it clear about these are real emotion skills. And so Ruler is an outgrowth of all of that science. And essentially, what I want to share with you today are two things: the skills, and I want us all to be aware of the potential dark side of these skills. Recognizing emotion. Identifying emotion by interpreting our own thoughts and physiology, as well as other people's facial expressions, vocal tones, body language, and behavior. There's a whole chapter, by the way, in my book on this paragraph. So you can read to your heart's delight about emotion perception and the challenges with it. But I want to try one with you right now. So I'm going to show a facial expression, and I'm going to ask all of you to rate it. Are you ready? I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. You can see me a little bigger. Hey, everybody. All right. Here we go. Okay. What did you see? Apathetic. Unimpressed. Meh. Tired. Content. Disgust. Content. All right, so let's stop there. We have bored, unbothered, content, meh, exhausted. Those are all the same. Content to disgusted to sleepy to bored to annoyed to intrigued. Let's think about this. Who's right? Who is right? That's the question. Who is right? All right, now I can't share my screen again, so you may just get me for the rest of this. I'm not sure what happened, but no problem. So, emotion perception. What do we need to know about emotion perception? Let me try one more thing though. Now how am I feeling? A little irritated, a little frustrated. Okay. Well, I can do this in my sleep, hopefully. So a few things that I want to share about recognizing emotions. One, people see different things in the same expression, and the question is, who is right? Oh, here it goes, I think. Oh, that was weird. All right, we're going back. I'm just going to keep going and we'll fix the technology as we go. First, people can see different things in the same expression. The question is, who is right? The second is, are we reading others' emotions or are we attributing emotions to them? Think about that for a minute. How I might feel or how you might feel in that moment might influence how you read people. We have what we call an own race bias or an in-group bias. We have an implicit bias, right? We activate stereotypic information about race and ethnicity and gender identity, even sexual orientation when we're reading people's emotions. Familiarity makes a huge difference, right? Consider the instances of emotion you've had with your loved ones versus strangers. And as I've said before, the only way to really know is to ask the question, how are you feeling? And really listen. I'm trying to get the video back. There we go. Yay, I'm back. Now I want to see if I can actually share my screen again. I don't know if that's one's going to work. Oh, there it is. Yay. It's coming back. think we had so many people on this that just going nuts. Understanding of emotion. So let me just summarize that again. When we think about recognition of emotion in face, we have to be very mindful that we may be attributing emotions to people. We may be having racial or implicit bias in the way we're seeing faces. And by the way, a racial or an unconscious bias is not something, it's by definition unconscious. It's because we have been growing up in a society where we have been primed to think a certain way. And as we make these judgments and attributions, that unconscious experience, that imprint of that stereotype is influencing the perception. Understanding of emotion, knowing the causes and the consequences of our emotions, as well as their consequences on thinking and learning and decisions and behavior. A few things to think about here. Our emotions are constructed based on our life experiences and development. Just think about that for a minute. Our emotions are constructed based on our life experiences and development. We have these global themes like anger is injustice, but what I perceive and what you perceive as an injustice can be completely different. Think about current racial injustice right now in our society. There are people who see things differently. Think about 9/11. There was one group, sadly, who were celebrating, another group mourning. How is that possible with the same event? And what we know is that different cultures also value different emotions. Some cultures have many, many words, as we'll see in a moment. Others have no words for certain emotions. What I'm going to say is that without understanding what causes us to have our feelings, it's really hard to label them. Labeling emotions, having and using a nuanced vocabulary to describe the full range of emotions. Think about this. Certain languages have words that we don't even have, and vice versa. We can enhance our understanding of other people's emotions and experiences by learning feeling words in other cultures. If you follow me on Instagram, I think, I did a post about this concept called mudita, which is a beautiful emotion word in Sanskrit that has to do with the joy we could experience by just watching other people experience it. It's vicarious, unadulterated joy. Pretty cool to just, during these horrific times, just take a moment and just watch, a kid on the playground or a parent interacting or someone doing something creative and just kind of relishing in their joy. If you can't find it for yourself, let's relish in others. What I want to argue is that teaching emotion language is a human right. I'm going to say that again. Teaching emotion language should be a human right. Everyone should be able to describe their inner experiences. Without language, we can't communicate our needs and get support. And really, to know someone, we need to know how they feel. Expressing emotion. Knowing how and when to express emotions with different people and across contexts, including the influences of personality and gender and power and social norms and race and ethnicity and culture. I have two older brothers. It's like we are from different worlds. They see me present like, oh my God, you're so vulnerable. They came to hear me speak one day and they like freaking out because I was sharing about my childhood trauma and my mother's anxiety and my father's anger. And at the end, we were leaving the venue and my brother said, don't walk out with us. You shamed our family. And I was like, what? They're like, yeah, we don't want to be known. We don't even know you're my brother. I'm like, okay. It's like, you guys could benefit a little bit from talking about your feelings, but I won't say that to 1,000 people. The point here really is that they have the right to express or not express. It's not for me to judge, although I just did. At the larger cultural level, right, we have to be cognizant that there are rules in our society about who gets to express certain emotions, who doesn't. And these often have roots in racism. And I think we just have to call it out on this webinar, and we have to call it out in the world around us, that certain groups have anger privilege. For example, me as a white male, I can express anger, and there are different implications and repercussions for it, which means that we have to think not only at the individual level about teaching these skills, but at the structural level. Minority groups often have to engage in greater emotional labor, suppression, compared to their white counterparts. We know from research this impacts health and wellness. At the larger cultural level, we have to be aware of ethnocentrism. There is no right way. Eye contact is the best example, right? In certain cultures, people put their eyes down. In other cultures, like here in New York City, it's like, hello, got to give people that eye contact, have a strong handshake. I gave a talk on Wall Street recently. I was like, hello, Dr. Brackett. I was like, hi. I didn't know where I was. I was kind of freaked out about that. But that's the rule. When I go to Korea for my martial art, people bow. It's not right or wrong. It's about being curious and being in that emotion scientist role. Regulating emotion. The thoughts and actions that we use to prevent, reduce, initiate, maintain, or enhance our emotions. Think about that. And Robin and I are going to do something in about an hour and a half from now on emotion regulation. So we'll get into a lot of detail there. But importantly, we have to think about this through an equity lens as well, right? Emotion regulation strategies are inextricably linked to our personality, our family background, and our culture. Context matters. Some children regulate better at home than at school. Why is that? How does context affect the way kids deal with their feelings? About adults, for that matter. Remember, the goal of emotion regulation is to support others in finding what works best for them, not what works best for you. And it's not about controlling our feelings. It's the opposite of controlling. It's about learning how to use our emotions wisely. And lastly, there is no correctness here. Unlike other subject areas like math and science, there's no correct strategy. The goal of emotion regulation is to find the strategies that work best for you and others that support your and others' wellness, good decision making, good relationships. So let's just wrap up our time together talking about developing emotional intelligence. For those of you who know me, I spent the majority of my career developing an approach called Ruler. I have a team of 60 at the Center for Emotional Intelligence who are working together to make a huge difference in the lives of millions of children at this point. And so our team is filled with former scientists, or actually current scientists, former school administrators and teachers, all of whom work together to just make the world a better place. And enormously grateful for everyone at the Center for Emotional Intelligence. And together we have gone from this piecemeal model to a more systemic approach. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because you can go into a booth if you want to learn more about Ruler. But I think it's important to know that we started off this work thinking about kids, and we ended up realizing it's not about the children. It's about the system. We've got to create emotionally intelligent systems that support healthy development for kids. We need all the adults who are raising and teaching kids to be emotion scientists, to work on those skills of emotional intelligence. We need people to focus on building positive and caring climates in schools and homes and workplaces. And we need to make sure that these skills are infused into the pedagogy, into the practices and policies, whether it be at work or at school. So Ruler is an approach that goes from preschool to high school. It incorporates standards like social emotional learning and social justice and the Common Core. We talk about there's too many rules in our schools and not enough feelings. Let's ask people how they want to feel. We just did a big study on that and found that people want to feel excited. They want to feel safe. They want to feel supported. Well, what are we doing to make sure that people are experiencing these emotions? We want to build that emotion vocabulary, understand the science of emotion, how it influences the way our brains operate, how it influences instruction and learning and leading teams and meetings. This is the mood meter in schools. You can just see so many creative adaptations from preschool to high school, all different languages. Robin and I have built a mood meter app that leads to the OG Life Lab that we'll talk about in a minute, where you can plot yourself and get more aware. We have tools like the Meta Moment to help us build greater self-awareness and strategize. Seeing our best selves. So in our session on emotion regulation, we're going to talk more about what does it mean to be your best self. Because when you're triggered, like many of us have been, we really have to pause and think about the best strategy. We can't go with our automatic. And then we need tools, and we teach in schools tools to help children and adults engage in better perspective taking and empathy and interpersonal problem solving, right? Oftentimes the issues are not me, it's the community, it's the other person that was offensive or the bully. And so how do we build deeper understanding of each other? And how do we restore our classrooms to places where people feel safe and warm and welcome? And we've done a tremendous amount of research on Ruler. We know that it makes a difference. OG Life Lab is the organization that I had the privilege of co-founding with Matt and Andrea and Robin and Camila. And this organization was built because I was running around the world in part, and people were saying things like, how do we do this in the workplace? How do we develop strategies in our company? Because Ruler schools, and so people ask for tools and strategies. So you can learn more about OG Life Lab by going to the website, and Matt is offering a deal. So you can type in the code EI2020-7 and get, it's like a buy one, get one free kind of model to support you and your organization. So please check that out if you're interested for yourself or for adults in the workplace. And I want to wrap up by just putting this all together. In regard to self-development, I think we have to acknowledge right away that all emotions are information. Second, you got to give yourself. You got to give everybody that you work with, that you live with, or that you teach, right, that permission to feel. And that's hard if you didn't have it as a kid, right? And also, not all emotions are created equal. I know for me right now, feeling kind of despair about the world and overwhelmed about how to manage all the work, right? That's what's getting under my skin. And it might be the same or different for you. But we got to be deliberate about this. As you know, my hope is that all of you strive to be emotion scientists and not emotion judges, right? We may not change our gut reactions, but we can question our attributions. When you're reading people, when you're trying to make sense out of your relationships and people on the streets or at work or at home, make sure you're perceiving something about the person that is not something about you. Try to be motivated to be accurate, not right. Fight against those biases. Build your vocabulary and explore new strategies. Become more culturally competent. Our way is not the right way. And really, you have to consciously consider situational information and appreciate that developing these skills is harder than learning traditional skills. It just is. I learned the math that I need to get through life. I'm still at 51 working on my emotional intelligence skills. From the systems level, we got to move beyond what gets assessed, gets taught. We just got to move beyond that, right? We got to change the reward system in our schools and our workplaces to include emotional intelligence skills, because we know that those skills lead to critical outcomes. We got to get rid of the quick fix mentality, right? Just focus on the systemic change and embrace its complexity. Everybody wants the workshop, everybody wants this. We know that doesn't make change. Right? We've got to do this work systemically, from policies to leadership, to teaching, to students, to learning, to parenting. And we got to analyze all of our policies and practices. Do our work policies, do our school policies align with these principles of emotional intelligence? And we got to focus on prevention, not just intervention. Building protective factors to promote good mental health reduces the burden of multiple forms of disease and improves life outcomes. Think about it. We spend in California about $80,000 a year for someone who is in the prison system. We spend maybe $10,000 a year in student costs at the school level. Makes no sense. And then finally, we've got to face structural issues that perpetuate inequities, including stigma and racism. This is where the skills are going to really come in handy. Because when we use our emotional intelligence skills, we can have those difficult conversations. We can be uncomfortable ourselves. And I don't think we're going to get through this without being uncomfortable. So in many ways, we have to learn, as my niece taught me in kindergarten. She goes, Uncle Marvin. She goes, Uncle Mark, I use my strategy. I'm like, what do you mean you use a strategy? She goes, yeah, I used my strategy today. I said, what was it? She goes, face my fears. So I think we all have to face our fears in order to make the world a better place. And I want to just thank you for coming to this conference. It means the absolute world to me personally, and I know to our team collectively. I do believe that together we can create an emotional revolution. I do believe that together we can build a healthier and more equitable, innovative, and compassionate world so all children and adults can thrive and achieve their dreams. So thank you for coming today and tomorrow. I know this is going to be just a fantastic 2 days of learning, of training, and I just want to say thank you so very much for being here, and I'm going to make sure that you get to know the rest of the program. So after each session, we're asking you to think about why this is important to you. What are your key takeaways? What are the 2 to 3 actions you'll take? And here's our program. The next one up is Emotions at Work, which is going to be a fun panel. Then we're going to take a break, come back to our different tracks, then come back and have another panel discussion and end with a really cool conversation with my colleague Heidi Brooks. So on that note, I just want to say thank you again. And I hope you have just a fantastic experience. It's been a pleasure to be with you. Adios, hasta luego, y 안녕하세요. Bye bye, everybody.